This is SpinCheck Live with Leonardo Puglisi.
And a very good evening to you on this Thursday evening. Welcome into this special edition of SpinCheck Live here on 6 News. We've got a great panel for you tonight made up of two Victorian election candidates, but we want to begin with Peter Dutton. He is in Canberra right now at Parliament House preparing to hand down his budget reply, the Coalition's budget reply. First budget reply they've done in quite a few years, in fact, after Labor's federal budget, which was handed down by Treasurer Jim Chalmers on Tuesday. We will bring up for you in a second an image of Parliament House. You've actually got that feed there. So we're going to take Peter Dutton now, and then we'll come back with the panel later. You're watching 6 News. Stay with us.
Repayments, insurance premiums, visits to the supermarket, filling up at the petrol station, and especially in your power bills. Cost of living is skyrocketing, and it may seem out of control, yet it can be kept in check. But not while this Labor government makes bad economic decisions. Labor's budget was a missed opportunity to help you at a time when you need help. It didn't address our economic challenges or inspire confidence. It's a budget which breaks promises rather than keeps them. A budget which weakens Australia's financial position rather than strengthens it. And it's a budget which adds to rather than alleviates your cost of living pressures. Peter and Lee are pensioners from Bankstown in New South Wales. They've been with the same entity. Their bill is set to rise by $753 in just 12 months. Kel runs a multi-generational, family-owned IGA supermarket in Mapleton in Queensland. He negotiated a commercial and industrial energy contract when the Coalition was in government and power prices were much lower than they are now. Today, Kel's business is threatened as he faces an increase of $160,000 on the power bill from last year alone. Peter, Lee and Kel's energy costs will go up further, that much we know. Under Labor's budget, electricity prices are set to rise by more than 56% and gas prices by more than 44%. Now, we all know that these are difficult times. Nations around the world are contending with economic challenges born from the pandemic and amplified by Russia's invasion of Ukraine. But thanks to the Coalition government's record, the fundamentals of the Australian economy are strong. Costs of living are going up partly due to global conditions, but also due to this Labor government's bad decisions. The Treasurer said his budget makes hard decisions for hard times, but I say his budget makes bad decisions, making hard times even harder for all Australians. Now, whether you're young, whether you're raising a family or you're retired, whether you're an employee or running a business, on Tuesday the Treasurer failed to mention in his speech what Labor's budget papers revealed. Everything is going up except your wages. Cost of living, power prices, taxes, interest rates, unemployment and the deficit are going up or will be going up under the government's predictions. The same budget papers confirmed that real wages are forecast to go down. And this means that by Christmas, a typical family will be $2,000 worse off under this budget. So you have every right to be anxious and disappointed because the Prime Minister has broken his faith with you. Now, Mr Speaker, the job of an opposition is not to oppose for the sake of it. We don't disagree with everything in this budget, and policy must be judged on its merits. If it's good for you, we will support it. If it's bad for you, we will stand against it. So we commend several good measures in Tuesday's budget. The extension of the childcare subsidy to more Australian families, the commitment to reduce the pharmaceutical benefits scheme co-payment to lower the costs of medicines, the support for housing for our veterans, the initiatives to combat domestic violence, and the funding to help Australians recover from devastating floods. Tonight I will tell you about some of the Coalition's priorities, and I'll also highlight where the budget is failing you. In energy, tax relief, housing, filling job shortages, industrial relations and infrastructure in our regions. Labor's budget makes life more difficult for millions of Australians, and it shows yet again that Labor can't manage the economy when it forms government. Now, there's an historical pattern of Labor creating a mess and the Coalition cleaning it up. Liberal Prime Minister John Howard and Treasurer Peter Costello inherited a damaged economy from Paul Keating's Labor government of high interest rates and unemployment. They turned the economy around, showed financial restraint, introduced reforms like the GST and left our nation with the Future Fund. In 2013, Liberal Prime Minister Tony Abbott and Treasurer Joe Hockey inherited a broken economy from Labor's Rudd-Gillard-Rudd tenure. They commenced budget repair and prepared for a rainy day. And this work was continued by Liberal Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull and Treasurer Scott Morrison. By 2019, the coalition brought the budget back into balance for the first time in 11 years. Then, of course, in 2020, COVID-19 hit. That once-in-a-generation pandemic caused the biggest economic downturn since the Great Depression. It was only due to our economic management over the 7 years prior to the pandemic that we were in a strong position to implement a suite of support measures. With 2020 hindsight, we didn't get everything right, and some of the state government lockdowns went on for far too long, and some Australians are still bearing the wounds of those lockdowns today. But Prime Minister Scott Morrison and Treasurer Josh Frydenberg's policies kept our nation afloat. JobKeeper assisted 1 million businesses and kept 4 million Australians in jobs. Our cash flow boost helped 820,000 businesses. On almost every economic and health measure, Australia was either world-leading or performed better than other countries. The final budget outcome for 21-22 revealed a $48 billion reduction in the deficit and a $115 billion reduction in debt compared to the budget handed down in March. In just 1 year, from 2020-21 to 21-22, the budget improved by over $100 billion, the largest turnaround since Federation. There are now 596,000 more Australians in jobs than before the pandemic. Other economies fared much better than ours. Much worse than ours. The Labor government talks down our economy but could not name a single country whose position they would rather be in. They're vocal in criticising our pandemic response, but they remain silent on the fact that their own measures would have cost taxpayers an extra $81 billion, including further expanding JobKeeper and paying people to get vaccinated. As for Labor's claim about $1 trillion of debt, well, even my friends at the ABC, with their fact check, didn't support that claim. Now, every democratic government around the world, left or right-leaning, incurred COVID debt. Yet Australia emerged from the pandemic in an economic position the envy of most nations, with debt lower than any other major advanced economy. So when you hear Labor's spin, when you hear them carry on about a wasted decade, it's a distraction from the fact that this government has no economic plan. And Labor will continue to misrepresent the truth until the next election to mask their own bad decisions, most notably their bad decisions on energy policy. Mr Speaker, in the Rudd-Gillard Labor government years, power prices rose on average by 12.9% per year. Over 9 years of coalition government, they rose on average by 0.3% per year. 6 months ago, the Australian public heard the Prime Minister very clearly. He said to them that he had a plan to help with your cost of living pressures, especially your electricity bills. On 97 occasions, he promised to you that your bills would go down by $275. In this budget, instead of going down by $275 as promised, Labor's plan will see your electricity bill go up by more than 56% over the next 2 years. Not only that, of course, but your gas bill will go up by more than 44%. Now, pensioners can't afford that level of increase, but not just pensioners, self-funded retirees, families and small businesses too. In fact, most Australians. In Europe, we're hearing about people, particularly pensioners and low-income earners, having to choose between paying their power bills or putting food on the table, between heating or eating this winter. Their electricity and gas bills are spiralling out of control. Countries are rationing power, and not just because of the invasion of Ukraine, but because governments in several countries in recent years have made catastrophic energy decisions. They've turned off the secure supply of electricity and gas before the technology and system are ready for new renewable energy. Now, despite those warnings and lessons, this Labor government is following in the footsteps of those countries. Investing in renewable energy, reducing emissions and doing so credibly to protect our environment is crucial, and we're committed to it. Indeed, we want a sustainable and sensible pathway to reduce our emissions. But when the Prime Minister says to you that the sun and wind are free energy sources, your power bill tells a very different story. It's much more complicated than what the Prime Minister wants you to believe. The technology just doesn't yet exist at the scale that is needed to store renewable energy for electricity to be reliable at night or during peak periods. That is just the scientific reality. Firming up means using coal, gas, hydro, hydrogen, nuclear or batteries as an energy source or to store power when renewables aren't feeding the system. But Labor is going to phase out coal and gas before the new technology has been developed and rolled out. The Energy Minister calls gas pipeline projects BS. Indeed, in this budget, the government makes it harder for more gas supply at a time when we need it most. On Tuesday night, we saw the government rip up funding for gas exploration and cancel gas infrastructure projects, which would eliminate shortfalls and make your bills cheaper. They handed over funding to environmental activists who want to overturn gas project approvals. Higher gas prices will be baked in for the foreseeable future, putting high-paying jobs in regional communities at risk. Competitively priced hydrogen is at least a decade away, and the best batteries in the world today, like the Victorian Big Battery, provide only 30 minutes of power at full discharge. Labor's push for 82% renewables by 2030 comes without a plan to ensure reliable baseload power. Its policies will see hundreds of billions of dollars spent on rolling out poles and high transmission wires in towns and suburbs. Labor is misleading Australians when it says it can roll out billions of dollars worth of transmission wires, cables and towers for renewable energy in just the next few years. Regional communities and farms will be carpeted with up to 28,000 kilometres of new high-voltage transmission lines. That's almost the entire coastline of mainland Australia, or the distance of travelling from Melbourne to Perth and back 4 times. Every dollar spent on new transmission lines will be paid for by consumers through higher electricity bills. Bills your Prime Minister promised would go down by $275. The Energy Minister himself outed the reckless rush to renewables. He acknowledged that to reach Labor's legislated 43% 2030 emissions target, 40 wind turbines must be built every month and 22,000 solar panels installed every day in our country for the next 8 years. And these costs will considerably ramp up your power bills over coming years. So the 56% hike in your electricity bill that the Treasurer never mentioned in his speech last night is just the beginning. And as the Australian Workers' Union noted, struggling manufacturers will be forced to move their operations offshore. Now, should that occur, there will be no net benefit to the global environment, only a net loss of Aussie jobs, income and sovereign capabilities. Meanwhile, Canada, France, Japan, South Korea, the UK and the US are all investing in next-generation zero-emission nuclear small modular reactors. They are doing this to shore up energy security and to meet their zero emissions targets. The UK plans to triple the size of its new generation nuclear by 2050. The imperative to create affordable, reliable and emissions-free energy is why the Coalition is seeking an intelligent conversation on the role that these new age nuclear technologies might or might not be able to play in the energy mix. Mr Speaker, your cost of living relief is interconnected with tax relief. To help you and your families to plan and get ahead, the Coalition believes in a core principle, that you should keep more of what you earn. Hard-working Australians should be rewarded, and the best reward for hard work is lower taxes. Due to our tax relief in government, a person earning $90,000 paid $3,000 less tax than they did under Labor each and every year. Stage 3 of our legislated plan and lower tax for more than 10 million Australians will simplify our tax system, abolishing the 37% tax rate in its entirety and reducing the 32.5% tax rate to 30%. It means that those earning between $45,000 and $200,000, you will pay no more than 30 cents in the dollar. For a hairdresser earning $60,000 a year, it means $400 more in your pocket. For an executive assistant earning $80,000 a year, $900 more in your pocket. For a qualified diesel mechanic earning $100,000 a year, $1,370 more in your pocket than in Labor's. For 95% of workers, it means a top rate of no more than 30 cents in the dollar. Our plan means that the top 5% of income earners will pay 33% of all income tax. For millions of Australians, you can work hard, take an extra shift, or get a pay rise or promotion without suddenly being pushed into a higher tax bracket. Our legislated tax plan future-proofs your income. And when your income rises over time, you won't be pushed into higher tax brackets or be hit by tax increases by stealth. Stage 3 tax relief comes into effect in July of 2024. And as economists have pointed out, after interest rate rises, that's when our economy will need it most. That's when Australians especially deserve it. Mr Speaker, Labor took our tax plan to the election. Like on energy, they promised unequivocally to honour their commitment, not to reverse it. But now they're laying the groundwork to break this promise as well. This budget provides no certainty for 10 million Australians expecting tax relief in 2024. The budget is intended to soften up Australians. It gives the government time to come up with more excuses by May of next year to tax you more. In fact, it's important to recognise that, and this wasn't mentioned in the Treasurer's speech, but under Labor, over the next 4 years, they will collect an extra $142 billion of taxes that come from you. And we know that Labor can't manage money, which means when they want more, they come after yours. Now, the Coalition will continue to fight for your tax relief because it's your money, not theirs. Mr Speaker, normally family members are here in the chamber for an event like tonight. It was great to see the Treasurer's wife and children here the other night. My teenage boys are in the middle of their exam block in Brisbane, and my wife is at home with them, making sure that they're studying for their exams and not watching television. But I wanted to mention my parents. They're both unwell at the moment, unable to travel down to Canberra. But my dad, Bruce, started out as a small businessman, as a bricklayer. My mum also was a secretary. And by the time 5 kids came along, of which I'm the eldest, Mum was at home raising us and doing the books for Dad. But she also took in local kids as a daycare mum. My parents had a very strong work ethic. They taught us to appreciate the value of money. We were raised with a lot of love and support, but not much money. We lived in what is still a working-class suburb. It was a time when Labor was presiding over high interest rates and unemployment, and it was a terrible time for the building industry. I was encouraged to get a part-time job, as many kids of my generation, and including today, of course, are. But from grade 7 until I started university, I worked in a local butcher shop after school and on Saturday mornings, scrubbing floors and washing up and serving on the counter. It was tough work, but it was character building, and it gave me an appreciation for many different perspectives. I saved like crazy, and one of my proudest achievements was buying my first home. It was nothing flash, at a bit less than $90,000 from memory, but it was mine. And today, of course, it's much harder, almost impossible, for many young people to afford their first home, even with hard work, even with sacrifice, and even with savings. Tonight, I recommit the Coalition to assisting first home buyers by accessing their superannuation through the Super Home Buyer Scheme. Currently, a super fund can be used to buy a residential or commercial rental property, to buy shares or even livestock. In fact, it can be used to buy almost any asset class except a home to live in. Taking money out of super before retirement is a bad investment decision unless you put the money back in before retirement. Take this example. A 30-year-old couple withdraws $50,000 each from super to help buy a home. Over a decade, the $100,000 would be worth about $188,000 had it remained in super. But with the $100,000 from super, the first home buyers wouldn't have been able to afford their home. With access to super, they have a home to live in. If the house was sold after a decade, the $100,000 would be worth around $214,000. And if the $200,000 was reinvested back into super, as we would require, the couple would end up with a balance from that amount in their super when they retire of over $1 million. Under a coalition government, we will extend the same opportunity to women who separate later in life, women with very few housing options, and those who are increasingly left homeless. After all, your super is your money. This government thinks that it's their money, something that we've seen in this budget. They want your super to invest in someone else's home but not your own. And at the same time, they want super funds to be less transparent about what they do with your money. Now, the Coalition has a strong record when it comes to getting first home buyers and single-parent families into their own home. We support initiatives to increase the supply of housing, but the government's initiative has no detail. The Labor government has promised 1 million additional homes in 5 years, costing $10 billion. Now, does anyone believe that? It's Kevin Rudd-esque in design. Remember the pink bats and remember the school halls? They were designed when this Treasurer was the Chief of Staff to the then Treasurer, Wayne Swan. So this program has a familiarity to it. Sadly, though, this program falls into the category of wasting billions of dollars and delivering very little, exactly what Labor did when they were last in government. Mr Speaker, another feature of this budget, not in the Treasurer's speech, was that Labor has no plan to save a predicted 100,000 Australian job losses. That's what they predict over the next 4 years. But it plans to employ 20,000 public servants in Canberra over the next 4 years. Across the economy, employers are crying out for workers. In June, the Coalition announced our policy to double the age and veteran service pension work bonus scheme from $300 to $600 per fortnight, or to $1,200 for couples. It's a policy to allow older Australians and veterans to work more if they choose to do so without losing their pension payment. It not only fills job vacancies and adds to the economy, but it helps older Australians and veterans to supplement their fixed incomes and to deal with Labor's 56% increase in their electricity prices. Those bills, remember, the Prime Minister swore to you, would go down by $275. Labor's policy is about 25% less than the Coalition's proposal. And right now, we need more incentive in the system to get people into work, not less. And we need it now because we need to mobilise a ready workforce. Mr Speaker, Australians were hoping that in this budget there would be a lift to productivity. Instead, Labor's changes to multi-employer bargaining threaten to undermine productivity and will be a throwback to the 1980s. Labor's changes will impose industry-wide, one-size-fits-all conditions which empower unions. Where union ultimatums are not met, however unreasonable, multiple sectors will be able to engage in crippling economy-wide strikes, where parties unaffected by disputes join in on protests. Now, don't take my word for this. Even Paul Keating has criticised this plan. The last time that unions used industry-wide strikes to pursue sector-wide ultimatums was in 1982. And in that year, unemployment reached 9.4%, inflation 12.4%, and 2 million working days were lost in industrial disputation. Mr Speaker, we're all here in Parliament to improve the lives of Australians, especially children. We're all influenced by our experience in life. And as a police officer, I saw the best and worst that society has to offer. I attended countless domestic violence incidents, and there's nothing worse than hearing calls for help from women or children as you hop out of a police car and run towards a house. I'm proud of the record funding that both sides of politics have provided to services supporting these families. The Coalition will invest significantly in these family support services and also to protect women and children from sexual assault. I worked in the Sex Offender Squad, which has stayed with me even to this day, the horrific details of victim statements and ensuing investigations. And as Minister for Home Affairs in charge of the Australian Federal Police, I led the cause. I provided $70 million to establish the Australian Centre to Counter Child Exploitation. It's now internationally recognised and works with global partners to protect our children online and off. It's estimated to have saved more than 500 children. And I acknowledge Bruce and Denise Morecambe. It's day for Daniel tomorrow, so please give generously, along with Sonia Ryan and others who have inspired us as parents to fight back against those who seek to hurt our children. Mr Speaker, they work hand in glove with the police to prevent children being harmed, and I'm honoured to have worked so closely with them for many years. Prime Ministers require a strength of leadership to make tough decisions to keep our people and our country safe. And my record in the area of child protection and the safety of women will be enduring priorities of the government I lead. The Coalition has always been a strong supporter of choice, and that's why we supported increased access to childcare for working families. We nearly doubled childcare investment. Women's workforce participation reached record highs. Women were earning more than ever before. Women's unemployment was at its lowest level since 1974, and this is a record of which we are incredibly proud. But we know that we can do much more. We'll also work with the government to combat the scourge of domestic violence in Australia. Ending violence against women and children within a generation is an ambitious but worthy goal. It's one that our nation should and must strive for, as is continuing to support those with disabilities. The National Disability Insurance Scheme is an important initiative for the most vulnerable in our society. The Coalition has supported it since its inception. We cannot allow, however, for this important program to become unsustainable. To do so would deprive those in most need of care. The Coalition is prepared to support sensible government proposals in this place and in the Senate to strengthen the NDIS and to ensure its sustainability. This provides a structural reform of spending in the budget, but most importantly, it provides certainty to people with disabilities and their families. Mr Speaker, we celebrate our migrant story, and it's a key strength of our economy. As the Minister for Border Protection, I did have to make tough decisions to keep our borders secure, but I also brought in record numbers of people from India, China and many other countries. I instructed my department to undertake an operation to resettle Yazidi women, and more than 4,000 Yazidis now call Australia home. And we're proud to call them Australians. And not all Australians will know the plight of the Yazidis, but these women were persecuted. Many lost their lives at the hands of Islamic State, and I'm incredibly proud that members of the Yazidi family community are in the gallery tonight. Now, many of their scars will never heal. The sense of loss of their loved ones will remain with them forever. But they will be able to tell their children, their grandchildren and their great-grandchildren that Australia offered them a home, that they took it, that they started a new life, and they're now a wonderful part of our country. Mr Speaker, it was disappointing in Tuesday's budget to see that $50 million set aside for round 7 of the Safer Communities funding was cut. Earlier rounds of the program supported the safety of our multicultural communities, for example, to provide security cameras at places of worship and programs to help youth at risk. A coalition government I lead will restore that funding. Mr Speaker, as a nation, we celebrate our wonderful Indigenous history, but we need to be equally proud of our British heritage and our migrant story. Many parents from across the country are increasingly concerned about the education their children are receiving at school. Despite great teachers and record funding going into schools, government and non-government, our nation's literacy and numeracy levels are falling short. In our school curriculum, it's important to include studies of the environment and many other social policies, but the system has allowed ideologically driven advocates too much influence over what is taught to our children. Teaching is a sanitised and selective version of history and the arts, and radical gender theory is not in our children's best interests. Mr Speaker, what is needed is a focus on making the basics a priority: reading, writing and maths, fostering a love of our country and a pride in our history and democracy, without sugarcoating the past, where the teachers lead the instruction and are supported to have orderly classrooms, where students learn respect, discipline and how to think, not what to think. A coalition government pledges to work with families to respect and to reflect their values and perspectives in our schools. So much of our lives are already online, be it through internet banking or sharing personal messages, videos and photos. While children and the elderly are most vulnerable, none of us are immune, and a coalition government I lead will do more to help families deal with the threats online. Our laws need to be tightened and social media companies held to account for what happens on their platforms. It needs to be a safe environment. We expect no less online than what we do in the real world. Mr Speaker, of course our threats aren't only online. Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine is a devastating reminder.
That is where we're going to leave Peter Dutton with his budget reply speech. He's just wrapping up there right now in Canberra in Parliament House, obviously responding to what Jim Chalmers had announced, the Treasurer, on Tuesday evening. You are still with us here on 6 News on SpinCheck Live right now. We want to move away from federal politics right now because there is also a lot going on in terms of Victorian politics, and we have a state election that is now, well, only a month away. So we want to bring in our panel right now. Now, we do have a commitment here at 6 News to speak to at least one person from every single party. Now, we've already spoken to someone from the Victorian Socialists, but we thought, why not do it again? So we have here Mutu Yorbulan. He is the party's candidate for the lower house seat of, I think you saw my cat there, for the lower house seat of Greenvale. And we also have Andrew Johnson, who is the Reason Party candidate for the upper house seat of Southern Metro. That's actually my upper house seat, in fact, although I am not voting. Very good evening to you both. Andrew, I want to start with you. You obviously ran in the federal election for Reason as well. Why have another go now in the state election?
Pretty much for the same reasons that I ran the first time, is a belief that I can contribute something, and that what I want to be, what I'm in this for and what I want to do is to try to improve the level that's happening in our parliaments, the sort of the level of discourse and the level of behaviour. I think a lot of people can feel is an issue, and to try to make a real difference. And I think I can do something like that. So continue to try and do that is what's motivating me to come back again.
Mutu, what about you? You didn't run in the federal election, but you are obviously running now. Why make that decision, and also why for the Victorian Socialists?
Well, I wasn't running in the federal election, but I was volunteering and organising on the ground in the Wills campaign. That was back in that time where I was needed. Because as socialists, we're not in it for ourselves. I'm not running as a candidate to advance anything for my own interests. I am helping to build a movement of workers and the poor and the young and the radicals, so we can commence a fight back together. So at this time, because I'm a Turkish migrant and the Greenvale electorate is full of migrants and many of Turkish background, I thought I could serve the community there best, because I understand what it means to be a migrant in this country.
Gotcha. Now, both of your parties, Reason and the Vic Socialists, are generally considered to be progressive parties. Mutu, I'll ask this to you first. Something interesting that seems to be brought up whenever we talk about Labor is where they stand. Generally, they've been called a centre-left party. That is a label that more and more people seem to be disagreeing with. In your view, Mutu, are they a centre-left or anywhere left-wing party?
I mean, I think when we talk about left and right, we need to define what we mean by those terms. I don't think the Labour Party is a socialist party. I don't think they're trying to change the system to be democratized as society. So I think they are as close to the center as it gets. And as you can see from how the state's been governed in the past 19 out of the 23 years, or the state of federal politics, I would not call them left wing now, and Victorian Socialists is trying to fill that gap in the radical socialist left.
Andrew, what about you? Obviously, Reason had its roots in the original Australian Sex Party. Great name, by the way. And you can tell I'm a 14-year-old, can't you? But obviously, you know, Reason itself also considered a progressive party. What do you think about where Labor stands in terms of being, you know, progressive in the state of Victoria right now? Because we always hear about Victoria being, you know, the most progressive state. I'd love to know your thoughts on that.
Well, I think sort of in a way broadly agreeing with what Mutu was saying at the start of that, was the idea when you get into discussions about what's left and what's right, you often run into people using a definition of left and right that suits whatever their motivation is at the time, and it sort of you quickly get away from what's actually going on in the real world into a sort of a mental sort of debate, rather than worrying about what effect what they're doing is having on people's lives and what's going on there. And you can really sort of, it's a debate that I think becomes uninteresting quite quickly in favour of what's actually happening, whether it fits as left or right or progressive or whatever label, what is it doing for people is the actual interesting discussion. Are people's quality of life being lifted? Are people's opportunities being listed and things like that? That's the conversation that's actually worth having, rather than can a label be attached, I think.
Mm. By the way, to our viewers, leave your questions in the live chat right now. We're going to read them out a little later because we do want to hear what you think about this. And regardless of whether you're in Greenvale or Southern Metro, we do know Reason and the Victorian Socialists are both running in every single upper house region. So you will have the possible opportunity to vote for them in some form or another. So, of course, leave your comments in the live chat right now. Andrew, again, the field of progressive parties like yours, like the Vic Socialists, seems to be growing. We obviously have the Greens, we have Animal Justice. Why should, a voter, maybe a bit left wing on the spectrum, if we do want to use those labels, or just generally progressive, why should they turn to your party over some of the others?
Well, yeah, anybody who they think as, probably the best way to answer this is to talk about the reasons that I'm with Reason. So first and foremost of those is that Reason's controlling idea as a party is to put evidence-based policy at the front of everything that we do. And that's a really attractive idea to a lot of people, because we do see a lot of stuff out there that doesn't back to the evidence, and it's policy that's being put up by various parties that suits an ideology, and then they try to find reasons to justify it afterwards, coming at it from the other angle. I think a lot of people really appreciate that. Another thing for Reason that really stands out is the record that we have, particularly through Fiona Pat, Northern Metro, of the amount that we've got done for the number of seats we have. There is, I don't think, any party in the whole country that has achieved as much with just one seat as Reason have. And the ability to work with other parties has been a strong suit of ours, and to actually deliver things. So those are some of the major things that have really brought me to Reason, and some of the major reasons that people would be likely to. If you want government to be pushed better, because I think at the moment it's pretty clear that the Labor Party aren't really scared of the Victorian Liberals. They're not pushing them to perform better or to reach for a higher height. If you want someone who's going to try and actually have an effective way of pushing the government to do something better, Reason's got just about the best track record of that going around.
Mutu, the Victorian Socialists are relatively new compared to a party like the Greens or the AJP, or even Reason going back to their roots. Do you all, and I don't just mean you personally, your party, actually have the experience to potentially hold the balance of power, whether that's the lower house or the upper house at this election?
So we need to define what we mean by that experience, right? When I look at Parliament, I see the experience of the same questions, the systemic inequality not being resolved. I don't think we can tinker at the edges of a system that continually for decades have served the interests of those that are on the top. So Victorian Socialists have the experience to organize workplaces, organize protests, and help build movements, and actually try to create the extra parliamentary force that is needed to push parliaments. I don't think parliamentarians make change because they have the good ideas. I think they feel forced sometimes by the social forces. And I can guarantee you, Jerem Small of the Northern Metro and Liz Walsh of the Western Metro, they have been doing this stuff longer than I've been alive. So yes, I think we have the experience to push parliamentarians to get change done through parliament.
Just sort of adding on to what Mutu was saying there, if I can, it's a thing that crops up a lot, and something that sort of strikes me a lot is that idea of, have you got enough experience because you haven't been in Parliament? But if we want things to change, then we don't want the people who have already been in there. If they were the people to make the change, they probably would have already done it by now. It's getting something new that's in there, and the idea that particularly the older parties sometimes use of saying you should only be kind of allowed in Parliament if you've already been in there before, it's pretty disingenuous, and I think it needs to be dismissed pretty strongly.
Yeah, now, I think the other thing is here, Andrew, and this is a question more specific to you. You're obviously running in the upper house here. A big issue that we hear about a lot when it comes to the upper house is, of course, how we get people in the upper house, and that's obviously the group voting ticket system. I don't need to go into a too lengthy explanation about it. I want to know, Andrew, do you personally support it? Because it very well could benefit you and your colleagues in Reason.
It very well could, or it very well couldn't. One of the things about the group voting ticket system is that it can be quite an enigma. It's quite hidden from the view of the public and the voters of what's actually going on. I mean, one thing's going back to you mentioning me running in the federal election is the sheer number of people that I spoke to who had an inaccurate understanding of how of preferences works. A lot of them seem to feel like the way that they operated at federal level was in line with Victorian group voting ticket. And I think there's a real phenomena there of giving people the wrong idea about how the voting system works because of group voting tickets still existing and them having to switch between those different ideas. So I think there's a real issue there. Yeah, it's one of those things that it's really hard to be on track of what's happening with it. One of the things that I think is a definite negative of it is it gives people who want to operate as a so-called preference whisperer or whatever, a position of power that should not be in their hands. The ability for someone to say, pay me money and I'll sort out a thing so that people who didn't vote for you will get you elected. That doesn't sound right, does it? That sticks and doesn't feel like the sort of thing that we want to have. I think the fact that Victoria is, if I'm right, the only jurisdiction that still has it, everybody else has got rid of it. I think that tells you about something about where we're going and the feeling of the public in general.
Yeah, and I just would like to remind our viewers, as you were saying there, Victoria, only state that has them, only in the upper house, only if you vote above the line, everywhere else preferences entirely your control, and that should be emphasized, and we will be pushing that message for all of you because it is something that's be discussed. Keep your questions coming in the live chat right now. Oh, there we go. We just have one on the stance on removing GVT. But I was going to ask, the other thing is, Mutu, something that I think I've seen on social media was that parties like yours, the Victorian Socialists, just do not get media attention. Now, you're the second Vic Socialist candidate, as I said, that's on this election. Do you echo those sentiments from some that you guys just don't get the publicity that might actually help you when it comes to election day?
Yeah, definitely. I don't think it's for lack of trying. We always reach out, but the system protects its own. The system propagates what will help the system persist, and they don't want to give a microphone to a bunch of socialists that are fundamentally against it. So yeah, we reach out, and you were great to reach out to us, which is fantastic. So we can reach out to a bunch of people. I wish we could do more of it, because I think our ideas are very common sense, and we're going through a very turbulent period, and more people should get to hear the socialist response to the current events. And I think running in this election, that's the whole point of electing a socialist to parliament, is using that platform and the giant megaphone to make sure we cannot be ignored.
And so do you reckon, and I don't just mean you in Greenvale, but do you reckon you guys have got a chance here? Again, you were only formed a few years ago, but as you mentioned, some of the people involved in your party have been on the ground, whether that's at rallies or just protesting for a while now. So do you reckon you've got a chance now? Because this might be the last election we have here in terms of your upper house colleagues with group voting ticket that could very well benefit you with the completely, unpredictable results that we have there. So yeah, what do you think?
Let me just quickly address that. We don't participate in that because that goes against our principles, and we preference left to right. So moving on from that, I want to say that bit of luck and a lot of hard work, I think we have a good chance of putting at least one socialist in the upper house. And I'm saying that because when we ran in the last state election, which was our first, we actually got primary preferences enough to win the 6th seat. It was the deals that made us not win. So we had that experience, we took it onwards, and now we're adjusting accordingly to increase our chances.
Andrew, of course, as you mentioned before, you actually do have parliamentary representation in Fiona Patten, who has been there for a number of years under various party labels. But what do you think about expanding, Reason's chances there? Because you did have, a fairly decent vote at the federal election too, but of course, it can always be expanded on, I'm sure, as you would like to see. So yeah, what do you make of not only your own chances, but your party's chances in general?
I mean, it's pretty hard to tell. Particularly with things like group voting tickets, it can be hard to know where you actually feel your chances sit. And also, as someone who's in a position where I don't have the money to run my own polling and things like that, and get that sort of data that some other candidates do. I think that almost even touches back to a bit of what you were talking to you two about before, with the idea of media representation and that sort of a thing. It also comes back to a big issue that I like to talk about a lot, is the disparity in money and how political donations affect the play out of our electoral results and things like that. It's really sort of the idea that it isn't a contest of ideas on a level playing field, that some parties and some people get a lot more media attention, they get a lot more money that can push their ideas out there, that if it's just a straight competition of ideas on a level playing field, I think we'd get a very different result than we usually do in Parliament. So, I mean, I think in terms of my chances, to come back to your actual question before I get too much on a diversion of my own, like I was saying before, when you talk to people about the idea of putting evidence first and things like that, it does resonate with a lot of people. So I think a lot of people really do click with the ideas of what a party like Reason is standing for, and what someone like I am looking to bring to Parliament if I can be, fortunate enough to get there. My challenge is all about being able to get that message out there. If I could speak to everyone in the electorate, that would be a very different issue to if I can speak to as many people as I will be able to with the resources I have at my disposal. So, long story short, I don't know how I'm going to go. I'll have to find out and see, but it'll be interesting either way.
Andrew, I do want to ask you though, and this is something we're seeing in the live chat, was brought up by Jackson Winter in our live chat right now, talking about minor parties working together, because it looks like, pending registration, we could see up to 30 parties running in this election. And even not just the lower house, where there's going to be obviously a lot more independence that you might see in the upper house, but of course in the upper house, it seems like every party would run everywhere. So Andrew, do you think we should have more cooperation between minor parties, maybe Reason and Vic Socialists, maybe Reason and another similar party? Because, I mean, I know your own party has had a few mergers. I think you swallowed up the Voluntary Euthanasia Party at one point. So you've obviously had some kind of cooperation there. Do you think, it might benefit a party like Reason and help sustain your parliamentary representation in Patton and potentially get some more MPs like yourself if you did kind of work together closely more? Or do you think you are working closely with other minor parties enough?
Yeah. First, I'll say I think Voluntary Euthanasia New South Wales is what you're referring to there. They folded into our New South Wales branch, but there have been some other parties that have linked in with Reason over the years. Working well with others is something that Reason has sort of prided itself on over the duration that it's existed, the ability to work with other parties to get results. So that's something that we are certainly in favour of, something that we like to go for, something that I think we would all benefit from more in Parliament, less of the sort of pugilistic approach of trying to find things to squabble over and trying to point score that we do see in parliaments at both state and federal level. And I think is something that a lot of the electorate really are quite sick of. It is pretty unedifying to watch question time often. So I certainly think that cooperation and sort of a more pragmatic and constructive approach between parties is something that the wider community would benefit from, are more focused on what we're delivering rather than who scored the most points in the House today.
Yeah, and I was actually reminded by Am Now in the 6 News live chat about the Fusion Party, which was formed together by about 5 minor parties. A couple of them actually never even applied for registration, so that's a whole separate thing. But Mewtwo, just wrapping up here now, and I'll ask the first question. I'll ask the question I kind of gave to Andrew there to you now, because the Victorian Socialists, as I mentioned, Broad came in 2018. I think you had some kind of an electoral alliance with the Socialist Alliance Party that I don't believe exists anymore. That's a whole separate matter, but I know Socialist Alliance will be backing a couple independents this election. Do you feel like you guys have worked enough with other minor parties, or do you think you should work more with some other similar minor parties, especially maybe on the socialist side of things?
Well, Socialist Alliance definitely still exists. They're just not
Mm.
registered to run the state election, so they're running as independents. And they used to be in the Victorian Socialist Coalition, so that's correct. But they're no longer in it. But we do have another grouping within Victorian Socialists because it's an umbrella organization. So at the end of the day, we work together, yes, but we work together as socialists within the Victorian Socialist platform. However, having said that, I'm just remembering now an example of, when Liz Walsh, the Western Metro candidate, called the counter protest to Bernie Finn, Victorian Socialists were marching with Reason Party and AJP at the protests. So we're more like a strike together, march separately kind of group. Because I think people are sick and tired of the status quo of nothing changing because everybody's on the same boat working together. We don't do that kind of stuff. But we will work together if we have the same goal. If the goal is to create a fight back against the relentless assaults of our cost of living, yeah, of course we can work on something together. But we're not going to capitulate on our politics. We're not going to capitulate the right-wing pro-business propaganda because that's not us. So to answer the question, yeah, we would if the situation matched our politics. So once again, strike together, march separately, I suppose. So yeah, we can work together if it comes down to it.
Yeah, just finally, and Andrew, I'll ask you the same question in a second. But Mutu, I'd be interested in your thoughts, just generally, apart from your own race, apart from the Victorian Socialists themselves. How do you think this election is going to go? Because it seems to be one that's a bit hard to predict. The polls seem to be saying Dan Andrews returned, but trusting the polls is a move that I wouldn't make necessarily. So what do you think about how this could go? Given if you are successful, you could very well be in the balance of power.
Well, I think I echo the sentiment of Andrew in terms of, this situation with the major parties, because I'm north of Bell Street. So when I door knock and speak to a bunch of people, there's this discontent with the major parties and the status quo, nothing changing, which I think will translate to a strong support with minor parties, basically. And so we're hoping that we can turn them into socialist votes by telling people about what our take on the crisis is, and that's the whole thing. So I think Labour is likely to win, and like Andrew said, we can't afford our polling, so I'm reading what you're reading, and it feels like Labour is more likely to win. Yeah, that's for sure. But we just don't know what it's going to look like. If it's going to be a minority government, I am not sure, but I think the trend will continue towards the minor parties, so we try to turn that into an actual fight back.
And for the record, Six News does not have our own money to run our own polls, so we are relying on whatever the Age and the Australian says. Andrew, I'll ask the same question to you because I think there was some comments that said, under any circumstance, an 8-year incumbent would be gone by now. But the Liberals have been having, as seems to be evident, a lot of their own issues in Victoria, to say the least. Do you think they've got any shot here under the leadership of Matthew Guy?
I mean, I'd never say they've got no shot, because that's always up to the voters. You've always got to listen to that. There's the adage that the voters are never wrong. At least in terms of election results, they're never wrong. They always predict the correct way it goes. I think in terms of how it's going to go this time, a lot of the things that I've been hearing from campaigning in the federal election and this one as well, like you two said, the dissatisfaction with the duopoly of the major parties, that idea of just having to be slightly less crap than the others being good enough. I think people are uninspired by that. And the results of the federal election, the rise of, be they independent or even the increases that the Greens took on there, have really showed the potential for the alternatives to the Labor-Liberal or coalition duopoly to be broken, and people are quite excited by that. And I think there is a real feeling of hope and an uplifted idea that if we can look beyond the sort of that duopoly and that trying to just be slightly less bad and that being enough, and to have the idea of really reaching for something better, something, some vision, some real ambition for what can be done in the Houses of Parliament, so much power in that room for what can be potential. I think that's really giving people a lot of excitement and driving a lot of people to be more interested in what's going on in politics. And democracy works at its best when people are engaged with it, when people switch off and think, I don't have $1 million to throw at donations, no one's going to listen to me. It drops off. When people get involved, that's when things start to get better. It makes it a much better thing. So I think there's a lot of hope out there. I think there's a lot of the potential for this to really be part of a movement that's going to get rolling to shake things up in terms of electoral politics. And I think that, I think that the major parties' hold on the electorate is going to weaken. That's my sort of most firm prediction for this one. The polls are saying that it's very likely that the Liberals aren't going to take it, and I don't see the Liberals inspiring and uplifting people in the conversations I have out in the community. And I might have a bit of a bubble, but I really don't feel that that's what we're going to see.
It's a really tough challenge for the Liberal Party right now, but we will have to wait and see. Thank you very much both for your time. You've been really generous with your time. Andrew, I might be seeing you around the Southern Metro region, but of course, best of luck to you both. Thank you very much for joining us here on SpinCheck Live.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
All right. Thanks to both of them there. We are going to be back after the break with more headlines, including the latest on the budget, what's happening with Green Senator Lydia Thorpe, and what's happening in the UK. You're with 6 News. SpinCheck Live. We'll be back in a sec. No paywalls, no sign-ins. 6newsau.com is your one-stop place for all the latest breaking news, in-depth stories and exclusive reports. Plus, find out more about us here at 6 News, who our team is and where we came from. That's all available right now. Head to our website, 6newsau.com.
When big news breaks,
It pains me to announce that I have no option but to resign from the office of Premier.
Reimpose stage 3 stay-at-home restrictions effective from midnight tomorrow night.
6 News is there for you.
This was a scene of what some are describing as almost a violent confrontations with police and protesters.
Bringing you up-to-the-minute coverage that's focused on the facts.
I just wrapped up a call with the Trump campaign.
The waters have begun receding in southeast Queensland now. The cleanup begins.
No matter the time.
Welcome to this 6 News major breaking news we have for you.
No matter the place.
Yeah, sorry, I'm at the supermarket right now.
You'll always see it first right here on 6 News. Every week, Leo Puglisi and Ivan Lung discuss the big stories that matter in a joint podcast that brings together the forces of 2 independent and unbiased news outlets.
Lots of stuff to talk about, Leo, on the other side of the country as usual.
Thank you very much, man. Always great to chat.
Listen to East Plus West. Available now exclusively for Patreon subscribers. Sign up for just $4 a month. Head to patreon.com/6newsau. 6 News, proudly sponsored by Blackmagic Design. Find out more at blackmagicdesign.com.
Welcome back. You're still with SpinCheck Live here on 6 News. Thanks to our panel again there. We saw the budget reply from Peter Dutton earlier. We want to again look at the budget right now. It was the first Labor budget in almost a decade handed down amid soaring inflation and fears of a global recession on the horizon. Big on the agenda was the announcement from Treasurer Jim Chalmers that the Albanese government will contribute $350 million to a scheme called the National Housing Accord, which aims to deliver 10,000 affordable homes over a 5-year period that starts from 2024. The lack of a job seeker increase was another talking point for some. Labor said that Labor was saying weeks up to the election that they would consider it in future budgets. Weeks up to the budget, as we did see, they didn't do it this year. And I've also seen a report from The Guardian that claims Labor has flagged a potential intervention in the energy market amid some soaring prices there. Now, this was, of course, the second budget of the year. One was delivered before the election by the then Liberal Treasurer, Josh Frydenberg. The next one expected early next year, likely in either March, April or May. So we will have to wait and see regarding that. Meanwhile, Green Senator Lydia Thorpe has again confirmed she will not be resigning from Parliament in the wake of controversy about her relationship with former bikie boss Dean Martin. She conceded that while she should have disclosed a relationship, she did concede, rather, that she should have disclosed her relationship while serving on the National Joint Committee on Law Enforcement.
Information I received as part of the Joint Law Enforcement was treated in confidence. I strongly reject any suggestion that I would do anything other than comply with the committee's requirements. However, I accept that I should have disclosed this connection. I'm not going anywhere, especially while we don't have a treaty in this country.
Now, Ms Thorpe says she's now focused on her important portfolio work regarding First Nations people. As it stands right now, she will remain in the Senate until at least 2028. That's because she was re-elected to a 6-year term at this election. Now, in the event she did eventually quit the Senate altogether, it is assumed someone else on the Greens ticket in the Victorian Senate race would take her place. If she remains in the Senate, however, she could form her own party, join an already existing one, or sit as an independent. And overseas right now, calls for a general election in the United Kingdom tonight continue after the country got its third PM in 2 months. An invitation from King Charles III to form a government was extended to Rishi Sunak at Buckingham Palace, Sunak taking over from Liz Truss, who gained the title of the shortest-serving British PM in history, a record she set after resigning after being sworn in 44 days earlier by Her late Majesty, Queen Elizabeth II. However, Sunak technically holds that title now. Sunak has already faced criticism in the Prime Minister's questions over his appointment of Suella Braverman as Home Secretary. This happening just days after she resigned over misconduct from the same role under Liz Truss.
Was his Home Secretary right to resign last week for a breach of security?
Look forward to it. Well, he asked about the Home Secretary. The Home Secretary made an error of judgment, but she recognised that. She raised the matter and she accepted her mistake. And that's why I was delighted to welcome back into a united cabinet that brings experience and stability to the heart of government.
The Labor opposition are continuing to call for a general election, which polls predict they would win in a landslide. As it stands right now, the election is scheduled to be held in the UK no later than January 2025. And just finally tonight, to our random political party of the week, chosen by our Patreon subscribers. They have chosen the Belko Party. Now, the Belko Party was formed ahead of the 2020 ACT election. They had 5 candidates, all in the one electorate. That gave them 2% of the total territory-wide vote, but 9.4% in that one seat they ran in, Ginidara. They were formed by former Liberal opposition leader Bill Stefaniak and have said they will contest the next election, which is in 2024, and potentially another 2 seats, total of 3. Canberra Times reporting that the person who formed them will not himself run again. So that'll be really interesting to see that. And a reminder, that was chosen by our Patreon subscribers. You can subscribe yourself for just $4 a month, patreon.com/sixnewsau. That is SpinCheck Live, though, for this Thursday evening. Thank you so much for tuning in. It's been great to get through this. And if you've noticed, we've had some changes behind the scenes which have really helped us go to air tonight. But we do appreciate you tuning in, leaving your comments in the live chat. If you've missed any of tonight's broadcast, you can, of course, tune in on Catch Up on our YouTube channel right now, or head to our website, sixnewsau.com. For now, though, on behalf of the team, I'm Leonardo Puglisi. Have a good night.